when you're grinding all the time, it's one of those weird things where you're constantly chasing the what's new or what else is happening. And sometimes you just want to do a task and make money for doing the task.
Right.
That constant creativity is really tough. It's something that I suffer from. It's one thing to wake up and go work and do stuff you don't want to do. That sucks. It's another thing to get to wake up and do things you do want to do, but the problem is, what about those periods when you're not feeling creative? And I always tell people that are not making a living off of being photographers, but enjoy photography. And I'm like, okay, imagine that every single week you had to create something. And like those weeks that you didn't want to pick up your camera, nope, you still got to do it. And it's like forced creativity is really tough. And I think balancing that, especially when you're 10 years in or whatever, is like daunting.
Well, hey everyone. Welcome to episode 367 of F-Stop, Collaborate, and Listen with your host, Matt Payne. This week on the podcast, I'm excited to bring you an in-depth and heartfelt conversation that I had with YouTube sensation and photographer Alex Armitage. Alex opens up about the mental health challenges associated with being a full-time content creator and provides honest and balanced perspectives relating to several trends that we see on social media and YouTube. Before we dive in, I want to thank our latest supporters of the show. These 7 awesome people recently stepped up to provide support for the podcast financially on Patreon. Thanks to Charles Judson, Peter Rondinone, Kane Engelbert, Michael Remke, Paul Holdorf, Jim Basia, and Thomas Labar. Thank you all so very much. Since this podcast operates on the value for value model, I depend on listener support to pay my bills. Thank you to everyone who is helping to keep my lights on. If you too would wish to participate in helping keep the podcast alive, please visit patreon.com/fstopandlisten or find a link in today's show notes. Just hit pause and go join today. It won't take more than a couple of minutes, and you'll feel great knowing that you are supporting a fellow photographer. Cheers. All right, let's get to this week's episode with Alex Armitage. All right, Alex Armitage, it's great to have you on the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, when I asked for guests, you said, I would like to update your car warranty, and I was like, that's funny.
Yeah, I was like, hi, I would like to come on and make sure that everyone has an extended car warranty and let them know that they can get a new one.
And I was like, hey, that's a perfect lead-in for a podcast right there.
Yeah, exactly.
No, but seriously, I've been following you and your videos for a while now, and I think we're going to have a really fantastic conversation about all kinds of interesting subjects. And thank you again for writing that great article on F-Stoppers about the Natural Landscape Photography Awards this year. That was really helpful and appreciated. So
yeah, I think it was awesome that, you guys did all the work. I just get to talk about it. So
yeah. Well, cool. So Alex, for people who don't know about you and your photography, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Cool. Yeah. So I make YouTube videos about specifically landscape photography, but I think over the course of the last 3 years of doing it full time, it's kind of shifted into being a little bit more than landscape photography. It's obviously centered around photography, but other times I'll talk about life on the road. I've lived in a 4Runner for almost 3 years, full time. And then also I talk about things like my struggles of living on the road, my happiness of living on the road. I talk about things like mental health, some of the projects that I work on, how I use landscape photography to help my own mental health. Me as a person, I'm from Florida. I lived here for 30 years. I say here because right now I'm sitting in my friend's apartment in Florida. We'll get more into it, but my cadence of life on the road typically is the winter I go somewhere warm and hang out with friends or family for a couple months. And then I get back on the road for the rest of the year. So yeah, from Florida, not exactly the most photogenic place, but something that's really changed is that once I leave, the times that I come back, I'm more impressed by the beauty that's here. But also it helps that I'm here when the mosquitoes aren't out and it's not sweltering hot. So I guess that's a little biased, but yeah. Let's see what else. I got a degree in electrical engineering, never used it. I took a break after college because a little fun fact is I was running a recording and video studio out of a room in my college house that I rented with my best friend at the time, and we would take touring musicians in that needed places to stay, and then we would film them the next morning when they woke up before they went on to their next spot, a la kind of like Tiny Desk concerts or something like that. And I did that for like 2 years. Long story short, was when I graduated, I didn't want to just give all of that up and then go sit in a cubicle. So I kind of took a year off, even though I was working part-time for doing IT. And that long story landed me at another job shooting like documentary style videos and stuff like that. And I did that for like 8 years. And then I got into landscape photography. So throughout all that, I was photographing people, musicians, bands. You know, when you get into photography, you kind of dabble in a lot of stuff and you kind of don't really find your place until you do. It wasn't until 2016, 2017 that I decided, okay, I'm just going to focus on only landscape photography. I'm not going to focus on any other types. And we'll get into why that is, but that'll play a role later. And since then, that's all I've really shot. And then I started doing YouTube full time about a little over 3 years ago. And now I'm sitting here in front of you.
There you
This
go.
is the top of the mountain.
Right. Oh, right.
We've made it. This is it. This is what quantifies, you know.
That, like when you started your YouTube channel, you're like, "Oh, my goal is to get on Matt's podcast." Come on, man.
Exactly. Hey, I mean, you have had some of the best and brightest and top people I would ever consider in a lot of spaces. I think that's really cool. Is like the photography world feels really small, but it's always big because there's always people that'll be like, "Oh, do you follow this person?" And I'm like, "Nope."
I know.
So I'm always learning new people. And you've had such a wide swath of people on the podcast that I think it's really nice to have such a varying degree of YouTubers and people you've never heard of and film photographers and people doing their own thing. And I think that's cool. So
Nice. Well, cool.
Yeah.
So that whole backstory explains why your YouTube videos are so freaking good, because you've
thank
had
you.
lots of experience creating that kind of content.
Yeah. The video part was always the second nature part for me. I think the hardest part about making videos about photography is honestly just how much I feel like it inhibits my creative ability to shoot photography. Like when I'm not shooting a video and I'm just out shooting, I get to focus all that energy onto taking photos. But when you're filming yourself, the priority is technically you're working, and the photos kind of like lose their priority when you're shooting. But the good news is, like, you know, as much as I know, it gets in the way the least, right? So like video is just, all right, just turn it on and try to focus on the photography. So that was very helpful for that part. Even though I was terrible in front of the camera for the first year. If you go back and watch some of my stuff from like my first fall color change in Colorado videos, I'll go back and watch those and I'm like, see, this is how I know I've made progress, because I am awful in these videos. So
Yeah, I don't know that we're going to talk about this later, so I just want to bring it up real quick. But what you just brought up right there stirred a little bit up inside of me in terms of not letting failure be a barrier to just doing it, right? Like, yeah, you're going to be bad at whatever you're going to jump into. You're going to be bad at it at first, and that's okay. Like, you got to work through it. I mean, if you listen to the first year of this podcast, some would argue like the last 7 years of this podcast, it's not the best. And so the goal is to just continually grow and to get better and to gain skills and become more comfortable in your own skin and learn things here and there. So I think it's good to look back and say, wow, that was not good.
yeah, exactly. And people that have inquired, mostly non-photographers that have inquired about making YouTube videos and stuff, is I always tell them that if you want to make a YouTube channel, if you want to make content, if you had two different scenarios where you had like great cameras and great lights, but you had no experience in front of a camera and you're just kind of there, just like trying to make something entertaining or, you know, seem like you're comfortable in front of a camera, versus if you just had your phone and your Casey Neistat, or you're somebody that has been in front of a camera for a decade or longer, that person with the phone is going to they're going to be able to do way better videos with just a phone, just because of the practice that they had doing it. And I always just tell people, stop worrying about like what you have. Just go try to make stuff, because that's what's going to take longer. Like a camera and the settings and all that stuff really doesn't matter when you're making videos. It's really you telling the stories and your presence in front of the camera that matters. So
Yeah, totally. Well, Alex, I want to dive into the thick of it here. So, are you ready for this?
Okay. Do I need to
I don't know.
do I need to do I'm ready.
I feel like it might get a little bit heavy. So,
Okay. Oh yeah, that's fine.
yeah. All
Let's
right.
do it.
So you've been traveling the country, all over North America in your Forerunner for a long time now. You've been living what many of us probably consider to be like the dream, right? Like, oh, I'm living in my car, getting to photograph these amazing places. A year ago, you released a video that recapped your experiences, which honestly was a great watch for me. But what hit me the hardest was how you shared some very authentic moments of vulnerability from the year, including some personal challenges with depression and loneliness. Can you talk a little bit about the challenges that come from full-time travel as a photographer and content creator?
Yeah, of course. So to give you some background, just in case anyone missed it earlier, I do live in a Forerunner full time, and you might be asking, how did that happen? Why did that happen? And about 3 years ago, roughly now, I found out that I was going to lose my full time job, which was simultaneous to also choosing to do YouTube full time. But I had a partner and I still had a house and stuff like that. Long story short, the week that I lost my job, my partner and I broke up, and it was mutual. It wasn't like anything devastating. However, it did beg the question of like, what's next? What am I going to do? And I had like this temporary build of my Forerunner. And so I just left for a month on like a long road trip, actually from Colorado to Vegas. And I'm sure you're aware that like there's just so much to see and do in that stretch of drive. So I did that because I hadn't seen my family that lived in Vegas. And then I came back. And then I left again for like 2 months and I drove up to the Grand Tetons, Yellowstone, and Glacier. And I did that for 2 months. And this was all in like this temporary Forerunner build that Nick Carver did a video on years ago where you could just put platforms in the back and leave your seats in and everything. It was great. But it wasn't like the most comfortable. And in that 2 month or 3 month period is when I decided, okay, I'm going to do this for a year. So I had a conversion made and I did it for a year. And now, 3 years later, I'm still doing it. And the reason I think is because that year, that video that you're talking about where I recapped 2022 was so important. The little bit of background information is I'm an only child. And my mom died when I was 16. She had a genetic disorder called Marfan's. It's pretty rare. Basically, it just gives you, long story short, most Marfan's, people that have Marfan's have weak valves and they have weak hearts. They're kind of like Great Danes. A lot of them are born really tall. And so their lifespan is a little bit shorter because their heart can't necessarily keep up with them pretty much. So anyways, my mom passed away when I was 16. So it was just me and my dad. And then my dad remarried a few years later. And then in 2019, so basically a year before COVID and 2 years before I got on the road, my dad's second wife took her own life. And so 6 months after she did that, my dad followed and took his own life. And I think that was probably like literally the hardest thing I've ever been through and will ever go through, especially as an only child. It has this like added layer of responsibility, even though I obviously have worked through the guilt and things like that. But landscape photography specifically, being on the road and creating have all been things that have like therapeutically helped me through a lot of that stuff. And that year, the one you're referencing where I made this video, the beginning of that year, I was like super depressed for a myriad of reasons. Like I had a relationship that didn't work out, not the one I referred to earlier, a different one. And both my grandparents had just recently died. One had died during COVID, one had died after that. And I was like extremely close to my grandparents, but I don't think I had really like processed it yet. Because I think for me, processing comes, like I try to do what's called like productive therapy or productive emotional trauma processing, which is like, okay, right this second, I got to keep it together and everything is fine. But when I go and like go out by myself or something, or just have like a drive with some music, that's when I can like productively process the things that I'm going through. And obviously it depends on how severe it is. And I hadn't really processed that yet. So the beginning of 2022 started really like at my lowest point. But then by the summer, I had decided to drive from Vegas to Alaska. And by the summer, so I think end of June, I was in Alaska. And I had decided to make daily videos going from Vancouver to Alaska, my travels through Alaska, back down to the Yukon, British Columbia, and stuff like that. And some of the stuff that you watched in that video that you're referencing is basically just a recap or talking about that ebb and flow of starting the year at such a tough point, and then just pushing myself to just be out alone, just doing my own thing. And realistically, the only people I was talking to was my camera. Now, I still connected with friends and kept in touch over the internet and stuff like that. But I had so much expression and getting to go through those emotions that it kind of became a part of the identity of who I was as a not only a photographer but a person in front of the camera. And that was something that I really wanted to do. It just felt like the space of photography, well, the space in YouTube in general, a lot of people are putting on a person, a persona. Like, you can name quite a few photographers that you probably watch on YouTube, and you don't really know a whole lot about their personal life. You don't know their spouse or their dogs or what they do for fun. You know what they do photography wise. And it's totally cool. Like, that's something that a lot of people need to do. They got to keep that separation because they have their professional life and their personal life. And I think that there's a ton of respect for that. However, for me, I just wanted to be me. So if that was a day where I was feeling lonely or sad or depressed or wanted to cry a little bit with a vulnerable moment, I let it happen. Maybe I edited part of it out, but I let it happen. And I think that that's important because I think that in general, talking about those things, talking about the trauma or the things that we're going through emotionally, is more important. Now, obviously, you can't do it like every day. I can't be sad on the camera all the time. It's not something that people want to tune in for and, watch all the time. But I think it's just being real. And a lot of the times, like you said, you started off this question with saying that this is living the dream. And I think sometimes I wanted to point out that there's a lot that goes into it that is not, rainbows and flowers all the time. It's tough. Being out on the road alone is like, while super rewarding, and also I think probably is what literally got me out of being depressed, it was also like extremely challenging. I didn't see a single person that I knew for 7 months. So like going 7 months just completely alone has all of its own challenges. You kind of have to put your life on hold. I've got no pets. I've got at the time, no partner. You're not meeting new people. You're not seeing friends. You're just out there alone, focused on what you're doing. And for little bits of time, like if you wanted to just get away for a week, that's great. I've met people multiple times that will hear my story or be like, oh man, I wish I did that when I was younger, before I had kids and all of that stuff. And I think the perception of it is we all think like busy, responsible lives, and the idea of just going somewhere for 4 or 5 days and disconnecting sounds amazing, because it is. Like I've lived that life as well. But when you're on the road, it's actually the opposite, where like you have to go out of your way to connect. Like you're always disconnected and you have to go find internet service. You have to go push yourself out there to talk to a random stranger. Otherwise, you're just alone all the time. And it's like this completely flip-flop thing in your head that is tough to deal with. But to circle back to the original question and talking about that kind of thing is a lot of that trip that video talks about was me probably mending from all of the passings of the most important people in my life and getting to show little bits and pieces of that throughout the trip, talking about it here and there. I wanted to bring this up. I have a project that I'm slowly working on that deals with spreading my dad's ashes around the world. A little bit of background is I grew up really poor. We never traveled together. We're from Florida. The furthest we traveled was like North Carolina. So my dad him and I never got to take any trips together. So when I started shooting landscape photography, I used to FaceTime him from like these really insane spots, like one from Iceland, one from Norway, and weirdly enough, one from Bora Bora. And those are the 3 spots in my head of that just stick out in my mind. So my plan has been, over the course of the next however long it takes, is to go back to those really important spots and take photos with my dad's ashes in those spots. And there's been a few others that have just kind of happened where it's like, this is a spot my dad, like, we're going to do something here. It'll probably be something I do for the rest of my life. And it's mostly not only for me, but it's been, to be honest, to be blunt, it's been nice to talk about it, because I think that many people watching don't have that connection with somebody. They don't have someone that they can talk to about those things that they go through sometimes. And I think that's something that's really important, is to be able to talk about those things or know that other people out there are suffering from it, rather than just this persona online of like, oh, I get to travel the world and take photos and go over here and do these things. Like, no, there's a lot of real life going on. And that's kind of what I wanted to highlight. I hope that answers your question.
It does, yeah. It's interesting. I got to taste just a little bit of that this summer when I did the Colorado Trail. I was by myself more or less for 35 days, and I had friends that kind of would meet up with me here and there, which was really nice and awesome. And being able to share those experiences with other people was great. But man, when you're by yourself in the wilderness, that's a lot of time to, you're thinking and you're feeling and you're not focused on the day to day. You're like, okay, I guess I have space now to process all of this stuff that's been floating around in my brain for the last 10 years or whatever. And like taking that to the next scale in terms of doing that basically every day, all day for the rest of my life.
Yeah, I will admit having internet access is like I'm pretty sure if I couldn't have internet access, I'd go crazy. Like I at least need some level of like be able to watch YouTube, talk to my friends. But one thing that I always say is like pushing yourself to be alone out there with just yourself is either you end up loving yourself or hating yourself. And I think that me as a person, I grew so much over the last couple years because being alone has just been like I've processed a lot of these things. I've thought about, why do I act the way that I act? Why do I say the things that I say based off the experiences that I've had in my life, and just become like hyper self-aware of, oh, I'm this way in relationships because of these things that happened to me as a kid, or
Hmm.
oh, I talk about these things in front of people so openly because I think it's important because of the people that affected me in my life. There's all these things that I'm the type of person that's like very inquisitive, or I try to be all the time, where it's a 9-hour drive and I'm just thinking the whole time about like, okay, why did they say this? And then why did I respond this way? Like, why was I angry in this moment? And I'll break it all down and try to figure out the psychology behind it. And I think that it's those thoughts that I think a lot of us have, like a lot of us driving to work or commuting or sitting in the shower, those moments where like we're not doing anything else and we're just kind of like reverberating our own thoughts in our brain. It just gets like expounded when you're alone every day, all day for days on end, right? It's like shower thoughts for 6 months, right? So yeah, it can be a little daunting, but I think at the same time, like I climbed this mountain and I finally reached this point where I'm just like so much happier than I ever was. And it had nothing to do with stuff. It just had to do with being out there and learning who I was, and honestly facing who I was or the things that I had been through. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, it's interesting. I was struck by the timing of this conversation because I noticed over the last probably week, there's been a lot of videos on YouTube from big YouTube accounts talking about quitting YouTube and the stresses of running a YouTube channel. I think Chelsea and Tony Northrup did a whole episode on it. And so I was kind of curious, maybe you could talk a little bit about why you've decided to be so open about your own struggles with mental health in some of your videos.
Yeah. Well, to touch on the quitting thing, I think it makes sense from if I can project my own thoughts onto it from experiencing it. Is even though I've only done it for 3 years, I definitely feel a lot of the things those people have been talking about, just because it's one of those weird, the grass is always greener on the other side things where like when you work for a job, you do a job and you get paid for the job. Whereas when you work for specifically YouTube, a lot of what you do is kind of up in the air, right? Like it's algorithm based, or one month is better than the other, or there's so much like this wave of things you have to either flow with or follow, like thumbnail meta, which sounds ridiculous, but it's a real thing. You have to kind of conform to these things where it's like you can make really great content and make really bad titles and not ever make it. And I think that really can get to people. And then
Yeah.
when you do it for 10 years, especially people like Tom Scott who did it, who made a quitting video, or Maddie, the guy that lives in Canada that makes videos about videos. When you're grinding all the time, it's one of those weird things where you're constantly chasing the what's new, or you know what else is happening. And sometimes you just want to do a task and make money for doing the task. Like it's
Right.
that constant creativity is really tough. It's something that I suffer from, and I'll talk about it with my friends where I'm like, it's one thing to wake up and go work and do stuff you don't want to do. That sucks. It's another thing to get to wake up and do things you do want to do, but the problem is, what about those periods when you're not feeling creative? And I always tell people that are not professional, like not making a living off of being photographers, but enjoy photography. And I'm like, okay, imagine that every single week you had to create something. And like those weeks that you didn't want to pick up your camera, nope, you still got to do it. And it's like forced creativity is really tough. And
Mm.
I think balancing that, especially when you're 10 years in or whatever, is like daunting. I think just finding a balance for it is the most important thing. Yeah. So for my own thing is I haven't really in the last couple months or probably 6 months, I haven't really talked too much about like a lot of the mental health struggles or anything that I've had. Sometimes it's personal. Sometimes it's like, I'm going through this phase or I'm going through these challenges. Like when I was in Alaska, one of the things that was really tough was being alone, and then I would meet people, and I would really gravitate. Like, okay, I've made a friend. This is cool. Like I have a friend here, but then I would have to leave, and then I'm just alone again. And I think that all people have a different scale of how much companionship, whether that's platonic or non-platonic, they need in their lives. And I think there are a very select few people out there that could literally go live in the woods by themselves with the dog and probably be fine. Like that's what they would prefer. But I genuinely think that like that population is extremely tiny, whereas on the other end of the spectrum, the majority of people need people, whether it's their best friend, their family, a partner. Most people need to be around someone else at any given time, on a cadence of every day.
We need human connection. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the part of the human experience.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I don't know the people listening. Everyone has different answers for why they exist, whether it's religion or their own personal journey or something like that. But on my road trips, on my living on the road, I think I discovered, no, I know that I discovered that my whole, like, what am I doing all this for? Why am I shooting photography? Why am I making videos on YouTube? Why am I living my life that I'm living? And the real answer came down to the connections that I have, like either my closest friends or the family that I would like to make. It is those. Like if I tried to think about if I could remove any single thing from my life and still want to keep living, would I? Like if you remove photography, yeah, sure, I could figure out something else. If you removed music, sure, I could figure out something else. Movies, anything, like insert anything. But if you said remove all of my friendships, I would just be like, what's the point? Like why would I don't want to, like I wake up and I'm existing so that I can be a better person, or ask myself to be, how do I grow today so that I can then affect those around me in positive ways? And I think that was something that was very important, is that for, like, I'll give you an example. For the longest time, I didn't think I wanted kids. And then I was on a beach in California in 2022, and I realized that the four most important people in my life were all gone, my grandparents and my parents. And I was like, I'm it. Like, I'm the only way that people are going to know who those people were is by me being the best version of myself because of them. So like, if you get to know me, if you get to see who I am, that's a little bit of who the people that I love the most are, right?
Mm.
And so it was in that moment, mostly selfishly, that I was like, well, damn it, I want kids because I have all these great stories and all these people that they're never going to get to know about if I don't get to pass it on to someone. And I think that same thing can kind of be, probably extrapolated and put into the YouTube videos, and why I talk about the question you asked, which was talking about my mental health or things that I go through, is because by doing so, or getting to express it, or getting to express like the happiness or the sadness that I go through, is a little bits of those like most important people in my life and all the growth that I've been in or gone through, and trying to like smush it down into a 15-minute experience almost. And there's obviously the ebb and flow of the videos on my channel is I have videos that are more straightforward, like here's how to edit this photo in this way, or here's me taking these photos in this place. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. But then I have other videos where it was like I was just recently in Newfoundland, and I spent like 7 days trying to shoot sunrise in this location, like 7 days, and I filmed all of it. And it was just like fog, rain, fog. And the day that I just randomly went in the afternoon, I just got all of these rainbows. And a little bit of background about my channel is, at some point I made the slogan of my channel that I sign off with every day being, there's got to be a rainbow out there somewhere. We just got to go find it. So that was like a huge thing. And then I was just being myself as much as I possibly could on camera. And I think that those things are genuine. Like I just try to be as genuine as I possibly can be, and not putting on some personality or persona, even though I'm not against that at all. I just wanted to be more of a real person that people could connect with on more than just photography, more than just what I can serve them as information. Mostly because I think that that's important. for a lot of people because it's not something a lot of people get to experience, especially from a parasocial relationship, right? So like we watch YouTubers, but we don't really have that deeper connection. And that's what I try to go for just by honestly just talking about like things that I'm going through in reality rather than only talking about what I think people want to hear. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're speaking to is driven by how society has pushed all these perfect versions of people's lives on us through social media and, magazines and all of those kind of things. And I think there's a strong desire but for most people and a thirst for authenticity and like, hey, like I struggle with these kinds of things too, and it's okay if you do, and that's not really the issue. The issue is like how do you get through it and what are some resources or ways you can move past these situations or learn from these mistakes you've made in your life, things like that. So I think people are really hungry for authentic content and to get to know people on that level. And so I'm curious, like, as a YouTube content creator, how do you balance that juxtaposition of authenticity and chasing the trends of, oh, my thumbnails have to be catchy or my titles have to be clickbaity or, the things that make us do cringy stuff that gets views and watch and clicks and comments?
Okay, so first of all, I am guilty of the cringy stuff that makes people watch and comment and all that stuff. However, I'll give you a timeline because I think the timeline kind of explains things. My first year of doing it, I told myself, so my first year getting on the road, I had enough saved up in terms of money that I was like, okay, I don't need to worry about making any money this year. Obviously, I would still like to make money, but my thoughts are going to be create and learn how to live on the road and mend from this thing that these things that have happened. And in doing so, that's kind of led me into focusing more on the creative, focusing more on what I wanted to do. And actually, when I went to Alaska and decided to make videos every day. So I was in Alaska for 90 days and I think I made 63 videos, which was like insane. Like it was the hardest I've ever worked. I would literally wake up for sunrise, shoot, edit all like edit in the back of my car, like this on my laptop. Not that people on the podcast can see, but if you could imagine a Forerunner, I can't sit up in my Forerunner. So I have to edit with my laptop on my lap. And I was just doing that every single day and I was so focused on it. But all I was really focused on was like being like telling the story. I wasn't worried about necessarily about like everything has to be perfect or the thumbnail has to be perfect or whatever. I was just like, I'm just going to do this because this is what I want to do. And now we're about a year and a half after that. And I'm in crunch time basically of like, okay, money matters. Like I either need to start making money, which I'm sure we'll talk about, or I got to do something else. And once that took effect, I had to realize like, okay, how do I want to balance doing what gets views versus doing what feels like I'm expressing something unique or getting to just do what is important to me. And I've come to the conclusion that the best balance probably for me is like long ago when I first started my YouTube channel, I had a video blow up about Lightroom calibration. Like it was just this editing thing and I could have pivoted into, okay, all of these new people that are subscribing, all of this growth, I could just make editing videos and I would make it. Like I could just do editing videos and I would
The Lightroom guy.
Exactly. Yeah. But I was like, there's so much more to photography and life than just Lightroom. And if I made the decision that if I'm going to make YouTube videos and it's going to be my job, if I had to just make editing videos, I'd rather just go get a job. But if I could at least make videos that felt like I was expressing me, I'm going to just do it my way. So the balance that I have kind of found is like maybe if you release 4 videos a month is kind of have 2 videos that are for me that are still obviously things that you'd hope people would want to watch. And then maybe 1 or 2 videos that are more algorithmic based, whether it's gear related, editing related, or something along those lines where I put more effort into a thumbnail or the way the video is created. And it's crazy. There's a whole like psychology behind video retention and all that stuff. And I know it. I just don't follow it for a lot of my stuff because sometimes I just want to be me and create. Whereas like if you go, my most popular videos are typically me comparing my camera to the newest iPhone. Those always do well because people search. They have they're evergreen content, so they get views for a whole year. But then the way that I edit them is all like it fits this psychological mold of it. And if you ever wanted to talk about maybe on another podcast, if you ever wanted to talk about all the psychology behind YouTube, we could. I could spend hours telling you all of the stuff that you would never know. Like if you're not a YouTuber, you would never know about all of these things that happen with the thumbnails, the titles, and the way the videos are structured that will increase your views exponentially. Like it's insane. But I think that that's the balance that I've found is a few videos that I know will do better for things like gear related videos, editing related stuff, where you're going to capture a general audience. And then also the videos that are more personal or just less about something specific and more about the experience of life or as a photographer. And I think that the hard part about that is understanding that by not just staying in one lane, it's kind of like shooting landscapes and weddings, right? A little bit. Where if you don't stay in one lane, you're kind of hurting yourself a little bit because you have some subscribers that are expecting an editing video and some subscribers that are expecting an adventure video or life on the road. And that's just kind of like the choice you have to make. If you want to make it harder on yourself, which I feel like I have, you can. But at the same time, I've always said if I can't do it in a way that feels genuine or like exciting for me sometimes, then it feels like I'm just going to work a job. Like I imagine right now if I had made editing videos for the last 3 years, I would be miserable. Like I would just be like, well, I'm successful technically and maybe I'm making a lot more money, but like I would probably be miserable. So I think that that's kind of just it's just one of those things that we have to go through. I think it's also the same that you probably have been through, right? Where it's like, I don't want to necessarily have to post an image to social media every day. I don't want to post it 3 times a week. But we all know that like if we care about our photography and care about us as businesses, it's like a necessary evil. And you kind of have to find your own middle ground. Like maybe you have found success without any social media and that's amazing. But you have to acknowledge that you're hurting yourself by not doing these things that are the easiest cut and dry accessibility, right? Like if you're actively against posting anything social media related, you're taking the harder road because you're not doing these things that would be getting your work on lots of people's eyes. And I think that that's something that everyone finds a different balance of. Some people can do it every day. Your Mad Peters Iversons can just post literally once a day for 7 years straight or whatever he's done. It's insane. And then there's other people like me who's just like, all right, 3 months I haven't posted anything. Because I always say like I'm a pretty bad businessman. I'm just pretty like I think a lot of photographers probably are, especially in the landscape space. And I think that that's just where's your line of like what makes you keep your sanity, but then also at least gets you, clicks and views and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think there's a certain level of introspection required in terms of thinking about why you do certain things, right? If you depend on photography full-time for your income, like both you and I do, there's certain things that you have to do in order for that to be a reality, unless you somehow rich uncle or something like that. But I think, like you said, there's a balance to be struck there. I think part of the problem is the way that the creator economy is structured. I mean, the wrong things are being rewarded in terms of what provides value to people's lives. I mean, clickbait content, stuff like if I wanted to create a podcast and it was all about gear and comparing cameras and like all that kind of stuff, I probably would have a sponsor, like Sony or Canon or Nikon would be all over it, or B&H or whatever. But that just doesn't interest me as a person and as a creator. And so it's just unfortunate that that's the reality of being a content creator or being a creative person in this space to begin with. But I think circling back to my original comment about introspection, I was hoping maybe you could talk a little bit about kind of your why. Like, why travel on the road? Why spend hours and hours and hours recording and releasing video content? Why are you sharing all of that with the world? Like, what's keeping you engaged in that process?
Well, the first thing before I answer that question, I would just wanted to hint at like the going back to the finding your line of things. So an example would be, let's say, Matt, you're like, okay, I know that if I make a video on this lens or this new piece of gear, it would do really well. And the way that I've tried to do it is, how can I make a video on this lens, but still in my way, right? So instead of sitting in front of a camera and talking about the specs of the lens, I'll just be like, let's go photograph stuff with the lens. Let's just go out and shoot some photos. And maybe I'll mention the lens a few times here and there. But realistically, it's more about like the experience of the photos. But I still get to use the lens and the title and the stuff that actually gets clicks. And then maybe that'll bring new people into my channel that are like, huh, he didn't really review the lens that much, but he showed me something that I didn't think I even wanted to watch. And I think that's the little lines that I tried to do, right? So like I couldn't just focus on gear, but if I can talk about gear in a way that incorporates the things that I think are important to the journey of photography or the expression of photography, then great. Let's see how I can integrate it so that I can at least feed the algorithm or feed the things that... So yeah, to answer your question, why I do it, I think I've touched on it a little bit. I mean, obviously I didn't decide to live in my car just because I'm like, this is what's next. But in some ways, I was a bit lost. And when I had that crossroads of, okay, I'm now homeless, technically, and I've lost my job, and I'm going to try YouTube full time. How do I want to do it? And for me, at that exact moment, I thought that in the landscape photography space, I felt like there was a lot of people that made content that is just in front of a desk, like talking about editing or something like that. And I thought for some reason in my head that if I got in, lived in my car and like lived it every day, like the videos that I had to edit, like I have editing videos that I'm literally on a park bench or I'm standing in front of some waves. And I have one from Oregon where I remembered my entire edit in my head and then did the edit, like screen recording later, but then talked about it because I had nowhere to film it. I had to remember the entire edit in my head. Anyways, I naively thought that like, okay, if I live in my car, if I go live and breathe this every day and make content that's like connected in that way, that I'll gain more following because it feels like, dude, this guy is out there. He's living in his car. He lives and breathes photography and landscape photography. He's not sitting in front of a desk and talking about gear. And then 3 years later, I am so wrong. Like, it is just not even funny how wrong that was. I had this, like, I guess, arrogant thought that if I did this, it was going to separate or keep me or separate, like, give me my own niche that, like, I'm going to garner a bigger following because I seem more authentic because I live in my car rather than living in a house and talking about photography in front of a camera. The reality is that is not true at all. Like, legitimately, again, if you go back to like my very first videos, if I had just sat in front of a camera, talked about gear and talked about editing at a desk, never going out to shoot any real photos, I would probably have more of a following and a bigger income doing it that way than what I thought was more authentic, which was like being out in the wild, being out there on the road, trying to find photos, trying to find unique stuff. And like literally living and breathing it and like putting myself through hell sometimes because like most of my editing happens in random coffee shops and my internet can be like, oh, it took 3 days to upload this one video, right? Like these are the things that I struggled with. And all of those things I thought would bring me more, respect is the wrong word, acknowledgement in the space. And the reality is it doesn't. I'm not going to name any names, but there's quite a few successful people that shoot landscape photography. And a lot of the times I never actually see them shoot any photography. And there's nothing against that. But that was what was in my mind. That was like, I'm going to do this and it's going to be great. And people are going to, really connect with it. And that wasn't the case.
Right.
It really did nothing for me for that. Now, the best part is like, by convincing myself that was something I wanted to do, it changed my life. Like the videos and stuff don't matter for a second. It made my life so much better because I think that I spent years at this point reflecting and introspectively working on myself, all while thinking I was doing this thing, photography and making YouTube videos. But the reality is like me years later is so much like I wouldn't change it for the world. I would not it is the best part of my life in terms of like non-personal relationships that I could ever have. It's an experience that I would never want to change, and I would do it all again. And it was incredible. So like I would never change that. Like being able to wake up in some of the places I got to wake up and being able to just like I was in Newfoundland a couple months ago, from September to I want to say October. And one of the best parts that I always try to talk about is like, if I'm like, oh, I didn't get the sunrise I wanted, I just keep staying there. I just wait. I just get to park and sleep in the same spot. And I'm like, I'm not in any hurry. I'll just wait until I get what I want. And that is such a privilege that is like unattainable by most people, which is why I think you said living the dream to start out with. And it's fantastic. And as much as trying to make that work is important, at least even if I don't earn a dollar, at least that I earned all of that. And I think that sometimes realizing that not making any money doesn't necessarily mean you're not gaining a lot in your life. So like it's one of those things that I've struggled with a lot in terms of monetization, but I've definitely had plenty of experiences that have been absolutely incredible. And to finally answer your question in a whole is now what I started out as is different than what it is now. And I've realized that my videos that do the best, I'm probably sitting in front of a camera at a desk and it just doesn't matter where I am or what I'm doing. It's just, but I think that, and that can really affect your psyche, right? Like, I think it's the same concept as I'm posting photos on social media. I'm not getting any likes. What's going on? And that is a struggle as a content creator where I will put a lot of time and effort into what I think is a good video. I'll post it and it doesn't do well. And I think that that's probably the hardest part about YouTube for me is that I put a lot of me. Like, I think my identity as Alex comes from living on the road, making YouTube videos and making photography. And if I put out a video that personifies all of those, encapsulates all of those things, and it does poorly, then I did poorly. And I think breaking that barrier is very difficult because, like, it's not just an expression of my art. It's a lot of, I also think that that's why people separate themselves in their videos from a personality, because if they don't separate them, then it might reflect poorly on, like, what did I do wrong as a person? And that's been super hard for me where, like, I'm vulnerable. Like, I'll talk about things, like, I'll talk about bad photos. I'll talk about good photos. I'll talk about the trials and tribulations of living on the road. And then when those things don't do well, it's like, oh, I guess people don't care about me, which is silly. It's dumb. I mean, I totally get, like, you have to separate those two things. And I think the more you let yourself just be you on something that you're expressing, the more you have to lose when it might not do well. But you also, I mean, when it does well, then you gain more as well. So it's kind of like, it's tough. There is no right or wrong answer to, like, being able to break that barrier. I know for me, on a smaller scale, when I decided to not worry about social media, I decided to approach things like Instagram or TikTok or Twitter or whatever from a professional standpoint. I didn't care about anything else. I'm like, I just need to post this professionally. This has nothing to do with me as a person. And once I was, like, able to add that line in, it got way easier to not care. The problem with YouTube is I have made an identity of myself that it is me. Like, this is the person that you're experiencing. So that has been difficult. But yeah, I think that now, right this second, the reason I'm still making videos and stuff is because I honestly enjoy it so much. Like, there was a couple months back where I was like, okay, I think I'm gonna have to quit, which still might happen. In terms of monetization, I'm like, I don't make any money. Realistically, I don't make enough, barely make enough for me to eat. And I was like, okay, I'm going to have to quit and get a job. Cool. Whatever. I've done it for 3 years. This is the end of the road. And then the more I thought about it, I was like, I could feel myself, even just thinking about it, slipping back into, like, a darker place where I'm like, if I don't make videos in some way, I don't know what else I want to do. So I told myself that even if I get something else, that I'm going to have to at least make a video or something every month to keep my sanity. Because it's what drives me, this, like, to have these creative outlets. Because, like, the thing about photography or landscape photography in general is you don't necessarily wake up with an idea and then execute that idea. A lot of the times you have plans, you're going on trips, and you get excited about the photos you take. But you're not, like, waking up and being like, oh man, I'm so motivated today because I know that I'm going to get a good photo. That's not how photography or landscape photography works. But for creating videos, sometimes I'll get excited about a concept or a video and I'm, like, really pumped to film it, write it, execute it, go out and shoot it along those lines, and getting to feel like I'm telling information or telling a story or talking about myself in some way that might attract people. that's exciting. That's an expression of like me as an artist, and then I also get to use my photography as a medium to like attract people. And I think that that's interesting, and it is probably why when people ask me what I do, I sometimes I don't know if I should answer that I'm a photographer or that I'm a YouTuber. So yeah,
Yeah, no, I mean, we could take this so many different directions,
yeah,
but as you were talking, I was reminded of like how all of those the reactions we get from the content we create, how that can either motivate us or demotivate us. Like, no matter how much you love the process of creating, I had a podcast I released a couple of weeks ago, and I've been releasing these on YouTube for a while now, for over a year, and it got like 64 views or something like that, and I was like, really? Like I spent hours editing that video and 64 people watched it, and it's like, why am I doing this again? And
hmm
but you have like that's a dangerous mindset to get into because you really do have to just focus in on like why did you start creating whatever you're creating, whether it's a photograph or a series of photographs or a project or a photo book or videos on YouTube, whatever it is you're creating, why? And
right.
like I'm sure your original motivation wasn't for external validation. I'm guessing, you know? So
Definitely. I don't think it is for anybody. Well, maybe there's some people out there that like have this idea of being an influencer and wanting to be famous in some way, but I think for most landscape photographers, probably especially your audience, which I have to imagine the demographic is 35 and older at the very least. If your demographic is like mine, which is 55 and older, most people get into this out of like either a retirement hobby or for me, I got into photography as a form of therapy. The reason I specifically picked landscape photography was because it was the photography I was doing that got me away from all the other photography I did that was felt more like a job. And it was my outlet to like push myself to go see things. I didn't even leave the country until I was like 27 years old or something like that.
I think
And
me too,
that's
actually. Yeah,
yeah,
20, 25, I think for me.
yeah.
Yeah.
So like it was one of those things that like pushed me to see the world and experience things that I never even knew existed, and it's remained that way. That's I do think that that's one of the beauties of shooting landscape photography, but also making videos about it, is that if I don't film anything, like if I'm like I'm not filming anything, I can still go and do it and feel those same things. It doesn't feel like it's work, and I think that's because my photography isn't my job, if that makes sense. Where if I'm just going to shoot photos, sure, maybe later on I'll talk about the editing of that photo or whatever. But the actual process of being out there and taking the time to shoot the photos, I can still approach from a completely just non-work related thing. And I feel that that's great. And in terms of you and doing the podcast, I think the thing that we always have to remember is like, sure, maybe one of your videos got 64 views, but I think that you've probably realized that the what you gain from the podcast personally is far more than the money. And then once you realize, when it is still a business thing, it's bringing so much other things happening around you that isn't directly related to the podcast, right? So like I'm assuming your name as Matt Payne has grown much larger through the community, and everyone knows who you are because of the podcast, even if it only gets 64 views, right? Like, and then you
Right.
started, the competition, and I feel like that, and you put a lot of work into your website and the things that you write on there as a reader and viewer of that. And but it's all cyclical, even though this one thing you're doing might not necessarily be like, if I only did this, sure, I might be this might not be enough. But if it's something that you enjoy as a person, as you enjoy as just like a side hobby that actually ties into what you're doing day to day, I think that that's really important. And I think most podcasts probably start as that, where it's just like, I'm doing this thing and there's not really anyone else talking about this. Let's just try it and see who I can get on here and just go for it. And then
For sure.
obviously 7 years in, you're at the point now where it's kind of like, okay, this is what else is this for? Because like it's great for you, but like at some point you have to realize, what is the purpose? Because it's shifted after 7 years, and I think that's the same question you were asking me. So Matt, why do you gain happiness, or what is the purpose of your podcast now in comparison to what it was like 7 years ago?
Well, everything you said is totally true. I mean, I've gotten so much out of creating the podcast and having these conversations with incredible people over the years. And nobody would know me from a guy on the side of the street if it wasn't for the work I've put into creating the podcast and all of the generous information that people share on the show. So you're absolutely 100% correct about that. And, as you get further along in creating things like this, your processes for creation become more and more involved. Like you're editing more, you're putting more effort and energy into making it a video. So like now that's a whole other process of, it's time. It's time that I would rather be spending making photographs or spending time with my family, right? And so I do have thoughts about that all the time. Like, what else is this? Like, if it's not, like, it's done that thing for me, right? And it still gives me a lot of joy and pleasure, and I enjoy talking to people like you. Like, I love this. Like, this is the best thing that's going to happen to me today. I guarantee it, and that's awesome. And it would be nice if I can put food on the table
Yeah.
from all that effort. So it is, it's interesting how those motivations shift over time as you do something for a while and as it grows in size and effort. I mean, I think that's the biggest thing. I think when I first started the podcast, it was like people would ask me like, how long does that take you? It's like a couple hours a week, maybe,
Hmm.
but that's what I was putting into it, and you could tell like it's like, and now it's probably 10 times that, so I'm not sure if it's 10 times better, but it's
Right.
definitely required 10 times more effort. So it's an excellent question. I don't really know the answer because I would love for it to be something that attracts sponsors or, gets me, just helps me in other ways in my life. But yeah, I don't know the answer.
Yeah.
I
I
really
mean,
don't. It's
I would
not,
probably, sorry to interject. I would probably, if to all the people listening, I would probably equate it to the podcast is like going out to take the photo, right? And then after the podcast is like, okay, now how do you make money off of what you just did, right? Like all of the business side of it is kind of like the up in the air hard part, whereas like the enjoyable part is being out and taking the photo or having a conversation like this one. This is the reason we do it. And
right.
it's the after the photo part that you're like, okay, well, now what do I do with this? Like, how do I turn this into something that's, puts food on the table in some ways, or at least is in a tangible way? Because that's the thing is, like I said, maybe you only get 100 views in the YouTube videos, but I know for a fact that like who you are, like in the community of photography, is very well known because of the podcast. And you have to ask yourself, well, maybe I don't have the stats, but this has some semblance of
Right.
like, yeah, it like
Yeah.
it has some impact. It has to. It could be a direct effect of like why the contest has some success is because you have such a voice in the community. It's just one of those things where like sometimes things happen that we just do because we want to do them, even if we know they're not the best for translating business wise. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's a dangerous road psychologically to always attach dollar signs to our activities, right? Like, I did the Colorado Trail this summer, right? I mean, I might make money off of that pursuit someday, like in terms of a book or whatever. But, I did that for me. I did that to experience that, to get the feather in the cap, so to speak, to, the list goes on. And so, going into that whole experience, I wasn't thinking at all about, oh man, if I gotta make money at hiking the Colorado Trail, like that was just an afterthought. Like, oh, I did this thing. Maybe there's something to making money off of it.
Hmm.
So, but yeah, to your point, I think for me anyway, I think it's important to remain true to your original motivations of why you started to do something. And when you start getting down on yourself about it not doing well or whatever, money wise, just forget about that and like
Hmm.
refocus your mental health on the thing that got you there to begin with. So maybe
Yeah.
that's a good segue for me to ask you another question. I mean, you've been doing this for 3 years now, living on the road. Can you talk a little bit about the competing pressures relating to continuing this journey and the current way you're doing it? And perhaps your psychological need to maybe transition into a different way of living?
Yeah. So a little bit of well, it's public on my channel, but I did meet someone when I was in Newfoundland, who is
Oh, yeah, okay.
now my partner. But I'll highlight the fact that dating on the road is like basically impossible It's just non-existent because most of the time, if I'm on a dating app or something like that, I can meet someone once and then I'm gone. And so, or the fact that most people wouldn't take not me seriously, but they would look at me like a temporary thing because I'm just coming and going. So dating on the road was like very lonely. I mean, it happened here and there, but for the most part, creating connections was the hardest part about being on the road, whether it was friendship or relationship. And I think that that's something we could talk a little bit about, like the sacrifices that are unseen when it comes to living on the road. Most people are like, where do you poop and where do you shower? Like those are the two questions I get the most. And the reality is, like, those are actually some of the easiest things for me. Showering, I'm sure you've experienced being like camping and stuff like that. Showering is so much easier than you would think. Like, you just get creative. It's very rare I can't find a shower somewhere, no matter where I am. Like, if anyone wants information on that, they can check out my channel and I'll talk about it. But to give you a little bit of background, like, showers are like, you could go to a gym, or if you're in small communities, a lot of them have to have community centers because that's the small town vibe. If you're on the coast, a lot of coastal places have harbors, and those harbors have public showers you can pay for. If you're on a major road, a lot of them have truckers that have to deliver stuff, and that's where you can get a shower. So like showering is super easy. The hard part is like, how do you have human connection? That's like the impossible part. So I think that part was the most difficult for me. And actually, when I was in Alaska, I had the original plan to actually drive to Argentina to do the Pan Am Highway, if you've ever heard of it. It's like 18,000 miles from the Arctic Ocean to Uruguay. It's the southernmost city. It's the point that you go to Antarctica from in Argentina. Ushuaia, that's it, yeah. And I was going to do that. And I decided against it at this point in time because I didn't think my mental health could handle doing that. Because if I had my plan was to actually do it January 2024. So last month would have been when I started basically America to South America. And I was like, okay, well, it's going to take me at least 6 to 8 months to get down there. And then I'm going to want to spend, since I drove all the way down there, at least like 6 months to a year. And at that point, it was 2022 in Alaska, and I was planning on leaving it a year and a half. I was like, okay, so for the next 3 years at least, I'm just going to be alone. And then by that point, I'm 37 years old because I'm about to turn 35. And I'm like, okay, I've already been alone for this long. It's like, you have to, being on the road involves these sacrifices that, I mean, obviously I don't want to talk about them in a way like, oh, I'm so brave and I'm giving up so much by getting to live in my car in Alaska. Like those are great things, but doing it as a way of life it has these unforeseen costs. And one of those was definitely relationships. Also, just like, it does get obviously tiring. My current setup, like, I can't sit up in my car. So like, if I want to work on a laptop, I have to go find a coffee shop. And that means I can only work on a laptop from a certain amount of time. And you're very constricted with all these things. And it just, that tends to weigh on you. But realistically, like, if I could snap my fingers right now and give me a van that makes me able to sit up and then also have internet, like Starlink or something, my quality of life would be way higher. But it's still the constantly moving around, because that's one of the differences for me personally versus most people that do van life. A lot of people that do van life will get a van and then live in a place for 3 or 4 months and then just move to another place for 3 or 4 months. So they create little communities and friends and stuff like that. Whereas for me, I was in my car to go explore the world, to go see things. So for the most part, I was only in a place for like a day or two at a time. Like, I was always moving. And because of that, I didn't create relationships or anything like that. And after 3 years, it got super exhausting. And I knew that it wasn't something that I could do forever. So as of right now, I'm still technically living in the car, but for example, I'm at my friend's apartment and will be for the next month. Thankfully, I have friends that allow me to live in places when I need it. But also, like I said, I met someone, and that will obviously change things a little bit. I think the thing that I'm most scared of now is I don't know how I go back to a normal life. Like, I'm like, how do I go back to living in one place? And I don't know if I can. I'm like, okay, I'm in a place for like a couple months, and I'm like, I got to go somewhere else. Like, I got to go see things. I got to go do things. So what I fully expect to happen, not that I can predict the future, but what I fully expect to happen is, like, I will probably be nomadic in some form or fashion, in smaller cadences, where I will have a home base somewhere, and then move around from there, rather than currently I have no home base. Like when someone asks me where I live, I literally don't have an answer. I have a storage unit in Colorado. That's it. I don't even consider that. And I don't have, because like I said, I have no parents, no grandparents, whatever. A lot of my home is actually my best friends, wherever they are. So the transition will definitely be like not traveling as much, but also I know myself, and I'm just going to be like, I can't sit here for months on end without going out. And because I just get into these routines where I'm like, it's too cold to go outside, or the sun sucks, I don't want to. Whereas when you're on the road, like, you have to get out of the car and go do things. And I think that was really good for me, personally. So that's probably going to be the transition. And I think dream, if I had one, is just to have like a tiny home in 3 different places. Like that would be the dream, is to have one in like Colorado or Southwest Colorado, one in Alaska or something like that, and then maybe one on the East Coast, maybe Newfoundland. I don't know if you know anything about Newfoundland, but oh my God, it was like one of the coolest
Well,
places I've ever been. Yeah.
yeah, I went there last June for about 10 days.
Did
Yeah.
you was it for the iceberg season or no?
We got to see a little bit of icebergs, but mostly was there for the Northern Atlantic gannets and the puffins.
Gotcha. Yeah,
Yeah,
dude, I mean,
it's
that
cool
that
though.
place, it's such an interesting place because it's so beautiful for landscape photography, and I don't know anyone that's been. You're the only person I know that's been there, pretty much.
Yeah, and it's different, you know.
Yeah.
It's flat mostly, but it's also got some rocky cliffs and yeah, I think it's a cool place.
Yeah, the coastal area of it is like it basically just looks like Ireland to me. So, yeah.
All right. Well, Alex, I have like 900 more questions. I have
Sure,
no
let's
idea
go.
if we're gonna get to all these, but
That's okay.
like there's so many awesome topics I want to ask you about because you're just a really cool dude. One of the issues I was immediately struck by when I was watching your videos is the challenging juxtaposition between wanting to inspire others to experience the transformative impacts of being in nature with the unfortunate side effects that can come from sharing these places on a platform such as YouTube. For example, I saw in one of your videos that you were at a very popular location in Colorado, right in my backyard, which has kind of more recently become a like influencer destination for a
Hmm.
lot of people. How do you grapple with these conflicting realities of creating and sharing content on YouTube?
So when it comes to sharing spots that could either become very popular, and I actually had this conversation specifically. We'll go back to Newfoundland, because I think Newfoundland was a really good example of a place that no one has really knows about or has gone to or explored photography wise. I mean, obviously people have, but it hasn't hit that like Iceland level, California coast level. For example, anyone listening, if you ask yourself, who do you know that's been, it's probably very little people. And so the guy that I met up with there, that's a local and a local photographer there, I had the conversation with him. His name is Gord. Great
Oh, I
guy.
know. Yeah, I know
Yeah.
of Gord. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah. I mean, like I
Follow?
said, this, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So if he listens to this, Gord, hello. Him and I had a conversation about sharing the locations of the spots that he was in Newfoundland. And for me, the way that I have tried to balance it is I will talk about where I am, like the plate, like I'll say I'm in Newfoundland, but I will not say the location of where I am. So even if you recognize where I was in Colorado, I did not say where I was. Sure, I might have a video titled "The $1 Million Highway," but like at that point, I think the title of one of the videos I had was "Why is this called the $1 Million Highway?" And I feel like at that point, I'm not showing necessarily a specific location. I'm not saying like you got to shoot from right here. I'm literally just driving down the road and taking photos. I don't really talk about like specific spots. All the stuff through Alaska, I never really said where I was. Anybody that recognizes it already knows where it is. And anybody that doesn't recognize it that wants to know where it is would have to reach out and ask me where it was. And I think that that's kind of like the line that I follow. I also just genuinely think that from an influencer standpoint, there's a there's a line that's like, okay, this place is pretty well known. I'm not worried about posting it. Like everyone, the bridge in Lofoten, everyone knows that spot on the bridge in Lofoten. Like I can post that. I don't tag the location because it's pointless, but everyone knows where it is. And if you don't know where it is, you can find out where it is. And I think that it's important, and that basically what you're saying is for the spots like that I might not have to say the location, but people will see them in the video. How does my influence affect people going to that spot more and more, right? So even if I only get 5 people to go, but another YouTuber gets 20 people to go, or another, it does have an impact. And I think at the end of the day, it just comes down to one of those things where it's like, the best thing I think I could do, because I also follow the idea that people deserve, if they want to or spend the money to go to those places, that they deserve to see them and not put like some barrier to entry or gates up. But at the same time, the best thing I think I can do is do what you do, which is talk about like, hey, what are the best practices so that my impact on this location is as little as possible? Because if I'm telling people, hey, this is a great spot to go to without actually telling them where it is, but also talking about like, hey, how do I minimize my impact, or how do I make sure that this is a place that will remain the way that it is for years to come? I think that's the best thing that I can do, because it feels like the only moral ground I can find when I'm doing that. For example, like, you might ask, how much gas do I use in my car, right? Because I live on the road and I'm driving thousands and thousands of miles. But on the flip side, I can justify it because I'm like, well, I do laundry every 2 months. I barely use any water. Most of my stuff is solar powered, right? So like there are things that I'm self-aware of, like taking flights. How much impact is having a flight to Norway have on the environment? But at the end of the day, you personally have to figure out what feels right and wrong to you. And like for me, using a plastic bag, I'm going to try to avoid. Me using a plastic straw, I would like to try to avoid. Do I still do it sometimes because it's like that's the only thing that's going to make sense in this moment? Yes. But being aware of it and making sure you're not just being conscious of those choices is what's important. So like if you want to take a trip somewhere, I don't think that you should guilt yourself into not doing it. But if you need to do other things to feel okay with it, like if you take a flight and want to donate a certain amount of money to something, carbon positive, the real ones, not the fake ones, maybe that's something you want to do. And I think that's the same for photography related content, where I'm at a location that people know. Well, hopefully I'm just inspiring them to do it in a way that's, pro environment. Because I think at the end of the day, ideally we would never share any of these spots and Instagram wouldn't exist and all of these spots would still be unforeseen. And I think that some people still would prefer that. But I got to be completely honest to myself, is like, I think a lot of the reason I got into travel photography and landscape photography was the explosion of social media and Instagram stuff. Just seeing these locations and being like, wow, I didn't even know this existed. This is incredible. And you could use the words, I'm part of the problem. Like I grew up and I was shooting photography and I got into landscape photography because I was starting to see all of these really beautiful things and places around the world, and it inspired me to go. But at the same time, it also helped change my life in a certain way. So like, we could narrate this story in both ways. We could say it had a positive impact or a negative impact. And I think at the end of the day, all that really matters is having the conversation about what to do going forward, because there's no going back. And making sure we have positive influence on the people that do watch us and stuff like that is probably the most important, rather than telling people, hey, you don't come here, only I'm allowed to come here. Like that's kind of silly.
No,
so
totally. Yeah, I mean, I've been accused of gatekeeping because of nature first and all that, and it's like that was never the intention of any of that stuff. I think it's more like just inspiring people such as yourself to just think about it and like how can you have a net positive impact? I mean, just by the fact that we're alive and breathing air and consuming resources, we're gonna have some impact, right?
right,
So
exactly.
like the question is like, how can we mitigate that impact and how can we reduce them that we have to inspire people in the right ways, or get them to, hey, well, by the way, yeah, this is a cool place, and by the way, hey, this is a desert, you need to watch out for cryptobiotic soil, whatever. So I think that's the right attitude, is like, how can you have a net positive impact, because impact is a given.
Yeah. I actually did
Yeah.
a video on that was titled, Did the Government Ruin My Photography, for Factory Butte with all the OHV vehicles? And I
Oh
think
yeah.
you and I talked about it at some point, or you commented. I
Yeah,
don't remember.
probably, maybe, yeah.
It's one of my first videos, but I made the video about that, where it was like the impact on this particular thing is directly affecting the photography and the location. And I'm sure you're aware of it.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
yeah. So anyways, I do have videos like that. Again, the I think those things rather than being the topic of like a whole video, is a lot of the times it's just more about like talking about it in the video. But when it comes to like specific stuff like that, it was something I wanted to speak out against. And honestly, I'm not perfect. Someone yelled at me the other day. Well, do you know Photo Tripper, right? Gavin Hardcastle, or familiar with his name? Well, we were in New River Gorge, and we were at a spot for sunrise, and in that spot is a fence. It's like an overlook, and then there's a fence. And I hopped over the fence, but it was onto a section that was just more rock. Like it's just slabs of rock, and the fence was just there so that people didn't fall off the cliff. And
Right.
I wanted to hop over the fence so I wasn't in his shot and I could get my own shot. And there was no one else around. But being self-aware of, the guy commented on my channel and his channel being like, this is awful. I hate people that climb over fences. I'm going to unfollow you. You're a bad photographer, like a bad person, photographer, whatever. And honestly, I completely respected his opinion because, I try to think about those things. But obviously for me, it was like a personal choice of, I'm not impacting the environment. It's just rock. There's no plant life or anything that the fence is protecting. And there was no one else around for me to influence. Because those are the two things you have to think about. Because if I jump the fence, then maybe other people are going to jump the fence and they're going to do things that they wouldn't. And again, so I'm not perfect. I don't follow like exactly to the T of every single rule. But
Neither
for
do
me,
I, by the way.
yeah, yeah. I'm sure there are spots where you look and there's a little sign that's like, it'll be like restoration area, don't walk here. And you're like 2 steps from the shot. You're like, okay, what if I just get over here just and hold the camera out as far as I can to try to take a shot? Obviously I try to respect those things absolutely as much as possible and try to provide some kind of positive reinforcement to those things or talk about them in ways. But for me, it really comes down to being self-aware of what makes sense. If there's a fence there that is protecting the environment around it because it needs to be restored, I'm not going over the fence. But if
Right.
there's a fence there in this case where it was just there for my protection so that I don't fall over it, and that on the other side, literally on the other side of it is just rock, well, okay, maybe if the shot's worth it, this isn't hurting anyone, especially since no one else was around. And there's a spot in Bryce Canyon, which I'm sure you've been to, where there is a fence, but then the fence just stops, and it's just there for protection. It's not. I actually talked to a ranger. I was like, hey, am I allowed to go over this part of the fence? And they're like, oh yeah, it's fine. That's just there so you don't fall off the cliff. So there are things like that where you can't just like blindly be like, oh, there's a fence there. The rule is don't climb over the fence, because sometimes in general, I would say not to do it, but you got to like use your brain in terms of like, here are the tools to know what's right and wrong. Can you justify doing this thing that, it is probably okay, but it all comes up to you, like the person that has the information.
And it's hard too because a lot of the rules that get created are in response to like one or two bad apples that did something really atrocious, and now we all get to pay the price of it. Like, I love and hate the fact that in most of the national parks they have very specific rules about how close you can get to the wildlife and things like that. But it's usually because some Turon like went up and tried to ride the bison and take a selfie. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like, okay, like I'm pretty sure if you're careful and not like charging the animal and keeping a safe distance, you're probably going to be okay. But like they've had to implement these fairly extreme rules to like just prevent the one or two morons out there from
Right.
doing something really stupid. And then you have the rules that exist that are like don't make sense, like in Yellowstone, if you're on in the winter, if you're on a snow coach and you're a photographer and you want to get out and you want to photograph like a coyote or a fox or something, if the fox approaches you, I think it's within, I can't remember, like 40 yards or something, you have to retreat and get back in the bus. But if you're on a snowmobile, you can do whatever you want.
So you're
Right?
saying
And like,
you're saying you could be next to it, the snowmobile,
right.
and it could be approaching you, and you have to technically back off. But if you're on the snowmobile, it can get as close as you.
Right. Or if you're a snowmobile rider, you don't
Right.
have to worry
Right.
about it.
Yeah.
But anyway, like rules like that where it's like, I take rules when they make sense,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. But I do think
and
the thing I wanted to take away was that person that commented on that, I think was very genuine, and also I respected their opinion, because even if I made the moral conscious decision that I'm like, hey, I'm not impacting the environment over here, my influence could have effects on other people. I think that's
Right.
always what's important, is like, hey, think outside of just yourself. Like, what is, if I go over this fence and take a really nice photo, maybe someone else that comes here is also going to have to go over the fence and take a really nice photo. So like it got me thinking that I was like, maybe I shouldn't have done it. Maybe it wasn't worth it. Maybe that was a mistake. And being totally open to that criticism, even though at that point in time, I made the justification that I was like, I'm not hurting anyone. No one else is around. But what if I took a good photo and now someone else wants to go there and try to take the same photo? So we do have bigger influence than just what is happening in the moment. And like, I think that's what you're getting at. And I think that's important to reflect on, is to make sure that we're always asking ourselves those questions, and making sure that we're personifying and expressing things that are positive and productive or progressive towards nature first stuff, for sure. So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
Well, speaking of jumping over fences, I'm just trying to find ways not to say shifting gears, but let's jump over a fence
Yeah.
and ask you a different question.
Sure.
How has your approach to photography evolved over the course of your time on the road? Like, I'm guessing you've tried out different techniques, you've maybe picked up different types of lenses, maybe you've dabbled with grand scenics versus, longer lens stuff. Like, how has it evolved?
I think I'm probably more lazy because I do a lot of shooting from the car now than because it used to be like, oh, I'm in a foreign place and we got to go on these hikes to find these shots. And a lot of the times if I'm going from point A to point B, it's not necessarily about the destination. It's about what's in between. So I find myself just like, oh, this shot looks good. And I'm just shooting from the car. That's probably happened quite a bit. But honestly, I've gotten some really cool shots just being like, because I was at the right place at the right time, driving by the right thing. One of the photos I submitted to the natural landscape thing was actually just some field shot in Pennsylvania that looks like it was AI generated, but it's actually just like this pristine symmetrical shot that I would have never gotten if I wasn't driving past it. So obviously I think that's played a role, but I think in general, the bigger scheme of things is I think that landscape photography has definitely shifted. And I've talked about this in either the articles or the videos that I've actually mentioned, the natural landscape contest, is that I think it's actually been an overall shift of photography in general, is that there's been a parallel between, okay, in the early 10s, we had HDR, and then it was like, I don't like that. Let's use the same concept, but then try to make it far more realistic. And then we moved into this like almost like dreamscape fantasy style landscape photography. People that do incredible work, your Ted Gores, your Mark Adamus, your all of these people that have taken like these images that are they're just constantly perfect. That's how I refer to them. They're constantly perfect images. Like if you follow Mark on his socials, I'm just like, this guy took more images in this photo reel for his portfolio than I did all year. Like it's just insane how perfect all these images are. But something that has changed, I think, over time, and this isn't to talk poorly or badly or about anybody's style of art, but I think there's been a shift, just how there's been a shift to the younger generation going back to film. Is like, they're like, I can take anything on my phone. I can AI generate anything. But if I want something authentic, like if I want something just like slowed down, real, here's a film shot, right? And that's what's happening in the younger generation. There's a big boom in film.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah, and it's the same thing that's happening a little bit in landscape photography, where I can AI generate a lot of these like really pristine dreamscape style images, but I can't do that for like these more mundane, simple images, right? So I think there's just been an overall shift in photography with the film and authenticity, simplicity, because I think what happened is we just had this like rush of, and again, I'm speaking from a time when I wasn't even editing, like I didn't even get into like really dive deep into landscape photography until 2017, 2016. But there was this huge shift to, we can do it all. We can make everything perfect. We can Photoshop things to look like exactly how we want them to look. And then we can even make them look a little bit not real. Like we can add this 10, 20%, like dreamscape is what I refer to them as. And the photographers that do all that stuff, and I highly respect all of them. Great work. Like it's what inspired me. That's like, if you go back and look at some of my early images, that's the stuff that I aspired to be. But as time has gone on, not only have I gotten lazier about editing, I don't want to sit in front of Photoshop for 6 hours. I used to do that. Like I remember I edited this photo for 10 hours. Now, granted, it was like some revisions, but man, we went in there, we painted some light in, we increased the size of a mountain to make it look more real. We got these panos, like I did all kinds of stuff. Now when I go to edit, I'm like, oh man, I got to spend more than 15 minutes on this. All right, we'll just go to the next photo. So like that's how things have shifted, and a lot of it has come down to, I think a lot of it for me has not only been more influenced by things like the natural landscape contest. I think that it has directly influenced the things like this past year, 2023. I made a challenge to myself where I was like, try to see things I don't see, try to shoot things that I don't naturally shoot. Obviously I get into these rhythms of like, okay, wide angle, put this down here, put this over here. It's going to look great. Great photo. Cool. But it's not doing anything. I'm not learning anything as a photographer. And because of things like the natural landscape contest, not only have I been things that a lot of it is just like, how the hell did they take this photo? Like what did they see? What was in real life when
Right.
they took these
And
photos?
how did that pass raw verification?
Exactly. And I'm just like, I'm just like, blown away. And I'm just like, okay, try to find these things. Like stop doing the things that you're comfortable with and start doing the things you're not comfortable with. So that's definitely had an absolute impact on me. But at the same time, I've also just like, just because I have the tools or I know how to edit these things, a lot of the times I have more photos every year. Going from what I used to, which was when I was living in Florida, part-time photographer, I really only took photos when I traveled, which is only a few times a year, right? So like only taking, so my number of images I was taking was very small. So that meant that I was pressured, definitely more pressured to be like, okay, how do I make this photo look better? So I would edit it more and I would do things to it. And I had a lot of fun doing that. There was a lot of expression of like the things that I thought I could try to do. And now that I just take way more images, I feel more spoiled in the fact that like, oh, I got a nice sunrise because I shot for 30 days in a row rather than 4 days in a row, right? Like I
Yeah.
have more to work with. And I think that that's something that's a privilege. And it's something I've talked a lot about in a few videos, is that when people view my channel or any channel, remember that like the people that you're watching or the people that you follow that work professionally, that run workshops and stuff, and like they are out there full time taking photos pretty often. And you can never compare your one trip to Oregon to a guy that's been running Oregon Coast workshops for 10 years, right? Like obviously
Right.
he's going to
Right. Right.
have 10 years of maybe 2, 3 workshops a year, and you've been there for 4 days. Like, and it's tough because that used to be me. I used to only really shoot when I traveled or went out. I was pretty bad about local photography, mostly because I just hate the humidity and the heat. Like, I have definitely found more natural beauty here in Florida, but dude, it sucks just sweating and getting bit by mosquitoes. And I just never had the inspiration to go out. So I would just only shoot when I traveled. And that meant that like I had this small swath of images to work on, but I was comparing myself to people that were out there all the time. Your Marks and your Ted Gores that are like, this week I'm in Alaska and the next week I'm in Patagonia and then the next week I'm in the Dolomites, and I'm just like, oh cool, I've got 7 days per year and I'm comparing my stuff to you, and it's just not realistic. And I think that's
Hmm.
also had an effect on my editing and my photos, is that I just have so much more to work with. It means that the photos that maybe I would have tried to make work in the past, I look at now and I'm like, oh, I'm not even touching that. I'm going to go work on this one that was better for whatever reason, because I'm spoiled. I have so much more stuff that I get the privilege of taking because I'm out there. So I think that those two answers are probably how it's shifted the most.
Yeah. And not to go there, but I think it's interesting that you touched on people like Ted Gore and Mark Adamus and Ryan Dyers and the Josh Snows of the world, where they're not only are they or at least historically they've gotten out and they've traveled a lot and they're taking photos way more than most of us are. But then on top of that, they're taking those photos that they've captured and they're layering in aesthetics that they didn't experience, and it's a hyper realized version of what they actually captured. I mean, Mark's very open about talking about how like most of the photos he shares on his Instagram or whatever, it's like that was a bluebird day and he added a bunch of clouds, and like
Mm-hmm.
he's trying to show what it could look like. Like that's his what he does.
Right.
And I think what I wanted to say about that is it's interesting to hear that the approach to making images has had a psychological downside on some people. Like I know like a lot of people are inspired by that type of photography and they are like, "Oh my God, that's incredible." But I think there is a negative aspect of like what it causes people to do in terms of comparing and like, oh, my photos will never look that way. Well, yeah,
Right.
theirs don't either, by the way. Like they just don't. And so those have been created by them in Photoshop, and it's important to remind yourself of that psychologically. I think for me at least has been. It's like, okay, that's not really like they're just not
Right.
luckier than me.
Well, they
They
are in
just
some ways. Like,
for sure, for
they get to
sure.
go to Antarctica 4 times a year or whatever it is. Um,
Yeah. But I think it's
actually,
important to disconnect those two things.
absolutely. And I think that when you watch the video that I think I did a video that talked about natural landscape photography contest, not last year, but the year before. And I had edited this Oregon shot and I had talked about basically, I think the title of the video was something along the lines of, is this landscape photography even real? And I know that you watched that one because we talked about it or you commented on it or responded to it. And in that video, I talked about, is there a responsibility from the artist? See, that's the thing is if you say, if is it is the photographer responsible for telling someone if something is like really there or not, like clouds, let's just say that. And the answer is it's weird because if you say photographer, I would say yes, I think someone should tell you that I added these clouds in, right? But if you say artist, I feel like there's less onus on it, right? So then you're getting into this conversation, are photographers or artists or whatever. At the end of the day, that the line that I've made is that I openly talk about that stuff. Like I'll be like, hey, I had fun editing this picture. No, the clouds were not like this. I used a slightly earlier image, or no, I edited this way, and I like to show it. Like I think that that's really important, especially for not only for myself but also just for the psychology of all the people that might absorb my work. Is that when I do images like that, I'll put the before and after. I'm like, here's the before in my Instagram reel, and here's the after. And a lot of the times that's to show either my editing or my choices as an editor. But I think that also brings some value to me as a photographer, because that means that when people, I don't know, watch my stuff more, they can trust that the stuff that I'm showing them could be more in reality, because they can say like, oh, this image, look, I saw how he edited it. Whereas people like Mark or Ryan, stuff like that, people, if you learn that a lot of their stuff could be highly edited, you now have this thing in your head where like, I don't trust any of their photos because I don't know what they did to them, right? So like maybe people have that outlook on their stuff. And again, I have nothing against them as photographers or editors or anything like that. I think it's great. Like I'm very inspired. I follow all of them. But I do think that it comes at a cost that sometimes if people learn that the stuff that they're doing is those things that they thought was, they had no idea that they were changing out clouds or anything like that, you might impact them because they're not upfront about those things. And I don't think they need to be all the time, but I do think that there is some conversation to be had that if that's something you care about, if you want your viewers or people that are watching or consuming your stuff to know when you're highly editing something or maybe less editing something, that has some value, I think. So
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And like you said, if they want to do that kind of stuff, knock yourself out, I think. And like I look at a lot of that stuff and I'm like, God, that looks good, man.
yeah,
Like that
yeah,
looks really good. I think it's interesting because you use the word trust. I think that's for me is a big piece of it, because of oftentimes the descriptions of the work aren't, like it doesn't say like, well, this was a fairly mundane scene, but
hmm,
and now it looks great, doesn't it? You know what I mean? Like
right.
it seems like it's almost always accompanied with kind of like this flowery language about how incredible nature is, and that's the piece of it that's disconnecting for me is like that disingenuous presentation of the work, having some implied representative qualities
Hmm.
of the image, and I think that's the piece that bothers me the most.
I
But
think
yeah, I mean,
to
go ahead.
harp on that, yeah, to harp on that, my critique of that is in the same vein, but it comes from like more workshop related stuff. Whereas
Oh,
if you are someone that makes those images and people want to come on your workshop to learn how to take those images, and then once you get there, you learn, you're like, oh, this is what it looks like when I take the image, and a lot of the work may be done post. That might come as a surprise to people that come. Like, or maybe they just, the thing is like, and that's the thing is, again, not against any of it. I just think that if I was paying thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars, and I went on that thinking that I was going to go and take photos like that I've seen, and then in reality take the photos and then have to do a lot of work to fix them, change them, make them look those dream style ways, maybe I leave the workshop being like, oh, I learned a lot of great, not only photography techniques, but also editing techniques to get to that point. I could also see somebody being like, oh, I feel like I was not tricked, but like deceived because I thought this is what real life looked like. And I know that most photographers hopefully know the difference, but I know for a fact with my friends and stuff, like just non-photographer friends that I'll show them images scrolling, they'll be like, oh my God, look at that. And I'm like, that's not real. They're like, oh. I'm like, yeah, that was changed. I can tell over here. And they'll be like, oh, well, that's not fair. And I'm like, that's not necessarily. It's just you have to have those glasses to be able to see what you think is real and not real. And it would be, I know for me, if I hired, like if someone came on a workshop with me and left being disappointed because they felt deceived by the work that I'd shown them from the same locations, I would feel really bad. Like I would be like that would be awful. That would be me failing as an instructor. So that's why I try to be as honest and open about like, this is what to expect. You can get images like this. We might get stuff like this. We're going to learn how to edit images like this. And I think that for me is like my baseline for it, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, those guys obviously have tremendous talent and the end result is incredible. And I feel like if it was me, I would like, that's your differentiator. Like I would leverage that and like
Absolutely.
advertise it that way. Like, hey, like, yeah, we might not see stuff that actually looks like this, but I'm going to teach you how to make your photos look like this no matter
Agreed.
what kind of conditions we find. And I think, that people are going to go into it more open-minded. They're going to like have that expectation. So
yeah, I'm not saying that's even happened, by the way. I'm just saying that that's the thought that's crossed my mind is like, oh yeah, okay. Well, you know more than I do. So
I've heard not stories, like I know firsthand, like where an image from a specific location was altered in such a way to make it look better than it is for the sole purpose of selling a workshop.
Right. Yep.
So anyway, I could harp on that forever. Let's talk about f-stoppers, Alex.
Oh God. Okay.
So you're a writer for f-stoppers. If people aren't aware, that's a fairly large photography platform online. Yes. Probably, I would argue, second to Petapixel is probably my guess. What's it like to create articles for f-stoppers?
Well, first of all, I would say I'm probably the worst writer on there because I'm not very consistent. Second of all, it's actually hilarious that I write. I'm probably going to downplay myself a little bit here, only because, like I mentioned very early on, I got a degree in electrical engineering. I am not great with English. Most of the time I'm like, English is my first language. I'm really bad at it. So from a writing perspective, there's a lot left on the table there. But in terms of writing for f-stoppers, if we want to talk about like the content, we can talk about that. But if we want to talk about like the business side of it, I think the f-stoppers model follows a lot of the same stuff that we talked about earlier between, algorithmic based, how do we make money versus how do we make really good, genuine stuff, and trying to find the middle ground there. So I have written for them, I guess 6 years now, but very little some years. Like some years I barely even write. And I have to say that Alex, the guy that edits everything, he's like the editor in chief, if you will, is like the sweetest guy. He's like such a genuine, great person. I know that people have their opinions of f-stoppers and stuff like that, but the general thing is like, I remember just wanting to peruse the news every day when I was into photography as a hobby. I would bring it up and just see what was there. And honestly, I remembered 2016, 2017. It was one of my best forms of, I want to learn something new. What's going on in the world of photography? So I think it's great. Writing for them is, the best thing for me is I'm allowed to write about subjects that also integrate my own brand. So a lot of the times I will make a video or make a script for a video, film the video, and I can just convert that script into a text-based article, but still have the video in it. And so that means that people can consume the knowledge that I'm trying to express through text if they would rather do that, or through video if they'd rather watch the video.
Sorry. Yeah, that makes sense. I had noticed that you were doing some articles where you would write about something and then like, also here's the YouTube video where I talk about this stuff. And I think, on first glance, it's like, oh, that's cheating. But I'm like, oh, that's a really good idea, right? Like you have that platform. Why not use it to your advantage to grow your brand and to grow your channel? And I think that's a perfectly great use of writing for someone like F-stoppers. I do want to talk a little bit more about the content though, because I know this is true for almost every photography platform that exists, YouTube, F-stoppers, Petapixel, whatever. The most popular articles are like gear related. So what kind of content do you wish platforms like F-stoppers would focus more effort on?
Well, I think there's like three tiers of media when it comes to photography. Like in terms of views, there are the articles that are like probably really informative and really well written, and honestly probably like go by with way less views than they should have, which is what I think you're getting at. But the subject matter for them and stuff like that is not, it doesn't make great searchability. It doesn't have evergreen. It's not controversial. So for example, I'll just speak from the ones that I personally know. I think I made like an insanely and I'm trying to remain humble, but I was really proud of this video that talked about composition and articulating composition in a way that I don't see typically done in videos. It didn't do that great. And then the videos that are obviously about like, a lens or my phone or whatever, do really well. And the same stuff that happens on YouTube can be applied to f-stoppers, where it's controversial, gear related, arguing, whatever, people have different opinions, is going to generate more views. And the thing about articles, especially, like I'm sure you're aware because I know you do SEO stuff and things for your own website, is that, like I said, there's three tiers. There's the stuff that's like really good but not very searchable or clickable. Then there's like your middle ground, like, oh, this is an interesting topic and it gets okay views. And then your top echelon stuff. The top echelon stuff is like it gets shared to like Apple News, Google News. It's like the front page of something. It gets picked up by another news source. And the reason is because, we're going to get into the broader topic of just media in general, is like the things that get clicks are negative or controversial. Those are the two things. And there's not a whole lot of negative in the photography world, like thankfully. I mean, I think a lot of the reasons a lot of us shoot photography is like it kind of escapes us from the all the bad parts of the world. But when it does happen, it can generate things. Honestly, at this point I just think it's part of the game. It's the same thing as me being able to, like, I want to make a video about composition because this interests me and I think it's really important. I think it's super informative, and understanding that it's probably not going to get nearly as many views as this video about my iPhone. And I just have to accept that. And it all comes back to that, like, what am I at peace with? Making a couple videos that are for me and a couple videos that are for the clicks. And again, you could Ben Horne this as much as you can. And when I say that, I mean, like, you can go against caring about all of the things like social media, doing thumbnails or titles the way that get clicks. And Ben and I have talked multiple times. I wouldn't necessarily say we are friends, but we are at least acquaintances on the same, in the same realm. And Ben has done it his way for his entire career. Like he has taken the harder road, in my opinion, very, very sternly. Or you can have people that are on the opposite end, like your Peter McKinnons, right? So Peter is widely successful when it comes to that thing, but he's always doing things that are clickable. He's always gear related stuff. He's tutorial based stuff. And I think that those are opposite ends of the spectrum. And you have to basically choose, just how f-stoppers would choose, where do you want to fall in that realm? Where do you want to, what do you want your content to be about? I think at the end of the day, gear is just a universal thing that everyone has to partake in, right? So like, Matt, you probably don't care that much about the lighting for a wedding photographer, or I probably don't care too much about how this baby was entertained while they were taking these photos of a, newborn shoot or something like that. We don't shoot that stuff, but we all shoot on gear, and all of that gear gets bought for years at a time. So it's searchable. We can come back to it. It's clickable. And then if you add a little bit of controversy to it, like one of the highest viewed articles on f-stoppers of all time, I think it's in the top 20, is my article that was like, could this new iPhone replace my camera? That's a controversial take, right? Like, that is the title of the video. It's also one of my most popular videos. And people are going to click on that being like, no, you're stupid. Like, this will never replace your camera. They'll say it without even watching the video or reading the article, which is
Right.
totally fine, because I know that I made I made the most clickable title I could come up with, right? So at the end of the day, I still genuine like my clickbait meter is like I will go as far as accepting that it's clickbait as long as the title still relates to something relative to my video, right? So my most recent iPhone one was called Apple Lied to You, right? That's hugely, it's just like, oh, what did they lie about, right? Like,
It's triggering.
exactly. And in my video, I don't talk about it barely at all. When I talk about the iPhone, I go through and I read out the stuff that's on the website, and I'm like, oh, this is not accurate. This is a lie. And so I can use that because I genuinely do think that. I was like, this is kind of deceiving, and they didn't really change anything about the phone this year, but they sold it as they did. It's not as if I don't believe that, but I mean, most of the video isn't necessarily about that, but it gets people to click, it gets people to watch, it gets people interested. And as much as I would love, I tried, by the way, I tried for longer than a year to not do anything clickbaity. I'm just like, I'm only going to put what I truly believe. I'm going to be as Ben Horne as I possibly can. Ben, I love you. If you're listening, I mean that in the best way possible. But then I'm like, I'm just hurting myself. Like I can come up with ways to still do what I want to do and then just articulate it in ways that will actually still get clicks. And I think it's finding that balance, and that I think that F-Stoppers does that. Maybe in ways that people don't necessarily enjoy, but also at the same time, it's not like you don't have to go on there and click anything. You don't have to even visit the website if you don't want to. It just so happens that I think the majority of people checking a website like F-Stoppers are also beginner photographers, right? Like, are you, Matt Payne, going on F-Stoppers to learn about a new way to edit your images or whatever? No, you're not. You're probably not doing that. But new photographers or middle ground, amateur, somewhere in between hobbyists, they pick up and put their camera down all the time. I used to do that. I would take photos for a couple months, then I wouldn't touch it for 6 months. And then when I came back to it, it became like a hobby again. And something that I could do is check websites, watch gear videos. And again, I have a tech-oriented brain. I have a background in all the electrical engineering stuff. So like the tech part was like super important to me. Now I don't I could care less about gear. Just hand me a camera and I'll take some photos. But back then, when I was at a desk working my normal job, if I wanted to put a video on or learn about something new, I'll watch it. I still watch gear stuff just so that I know what's going on in the world. Even though I might not care about it, I'm just kind of like, sure, what's the new, what are, Petapixel, DP Review, Chris Nichols, and what are they talking about? I watch all their stuff just because I'm like, cool, they have this camera that I'm never going to buy, I'm never going to touch, but I'm just going to put it on in the background. I also put other stuff on.
Chris Nichols videos when they're like on a lens I'm like looking to buy. It's like, what do they think of it? So,
exactly. We all go to purchase those things. So,
I mean, the thing about content, the thing that I've always heard from people is that your content should solve a problem, right? Like it should, what's something that people struggle with, and how does this content help them with that thing, right? And I think the challenge with long form content like a podcast or a YouTube video is that it's not always obvious. Mm-hmm. And for different people, it might be different things. Like maybe it just forces them to ask a question, right? Or maybe it forces them to think about their own approaches to making photography, or maybe it forces them to reconsider how they title their YouTube videos or whatever it is, right? Baitiness of some of the long form content that both you and I create becomes hard. I mean, if we were to create a title for YouTube for this podcast episode, for it to get clicks, it would have to be something like, this photographer destroyed the YouTube algorithm, or, something like that. And it would be totally disingenuous of what we actually talked about.
Yeah. You could be like, homeless guy seeks appreciation for his photo. I don't know, something like that. Just like, found this guy on the street. So, but that's the thing is like, a lot of the times the videos I make, I film them and I don't know what the title or the subject of the video is going to be about until I'm done, which is the terrible way. Like, you're not supposed to do it that way. If for YouTube, if you want to be successful, you're supposed to come up with the title and the thumbnail before you do anything else. Like that's what you're supposed to do so that you can fit everything to fit the mold of the things that are the people that are clicking on. But when it comes to, like out in the field videos where I'm like, I'm just going to shoot photos, I don't know what I'm going to talk about yet. I don't know what the title is going to be. And I struggle sometimes. And a lot of the times I will sit for hours. I'll make a title and then I'll just walk away from it. And then it's really just like coming up with curiosity things and then just kind of towing the line of like, are people going to be interested in this, right? So like one of my most recent videos that's about photography that introduces my new partner, I literally title it, I met someone and she's not impressed, because that's what happened in the video. But it got people to click because they're like, they care about me living on the road. They care about me as a personality. They're like, oh, he met someone. Who is this? Right?
Right.
It has nothing to do with photography. And obviously the video has to do with photography. But I picked that out because if I tried to make a title that was related to the photography in the video, it would just be like Bryce Canyon sunrise. Who the heck? Like, yeah, who cares? So, it's one of those things where it's like, you have to figure out your line, have genuine, like, where you want to be in the whole clickbait thing. And I'll bring up one person that I watch. I don't know if you know who it is. His name is Gotham Chess. He makes chess videos. So typically he follows things like pro chess, the professional thing. And my best friend used to watch him all the time, but deliberately doesn't watch him anymore because his titles are so clickbait. And he knows they're clickbait. Like he acknowledges it. But it works. It works. And that's the thing, is like, you have to find your line of what you are okay with. And as somebody that's in the YouTube space, I don't fault anyone anymore. Like, I'm just, you know what?
Yeah.
If there's a hot girl in your thumbnail and your title is really clickbaity, I don't fault you for it. Like, it just works a lot of the time. So like, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm like your friend. Like, if there's lots of photographers I follow on YouTube, and I find myself watching their videos less and less because like
Except for me,
the clickbaity title is like, that does not sound like something I care about.
Right.
Whereas if it was like my personal journey in whatever, like I'd be like, oh, that sounds kind of interesting. I might learn something. And like most people would be like, that's a snooze fest. But anyway, yeah, I think to your point, like it depends on where you're at in your journey, what you're interested in. I mean, obviously I'm not going to be clicking on the clickbaity iPhone versus Sony A7R5 title, but yeah, it works.
Right. It does. And I mean, I think the other thing you have to think about is, who are those titles for, right? So like, if there's somebody that you love their stuff and you watch all the time, it really doesn't matter what like their title is going to be. You're probably going to watch, you're probably going to enjoy it because you like that person, you like that creator. And if you're someone that watches all their stuff, you're not like, the creator isn't making their title or anything for you. Like, they're making it so that they can get new people, so they can attract more views, more people, to try to get them to see who you are. Because again, we're all just kind of vying for people's attention. Attention is the commodity, and we're all just trying to get someone's attention. And that's really what it comes down to. And the hope is that when you finally get someone's attention, you bring them back because of who you are, or they like who you are. That's really what it comes down to. And I think understanding that, it's important, because for me, I've gotten to the point where like, I just watch the creators I like regardless of what it says or what title it says, because I know the game. Like I understand it, and I don't fault them for it. And at the end of the day, most of the time, 99% of the time, I'm just watching it because I'm entertained by that person. And it's all free entertainment. Like I'm not, it's just like, it's really hard for me to be too critical of that. So
that is something that bothers me a lot, though, is when people go out of their way to disparage content creators. It's like, it's free.
Yeah, it costs you nothing. It's like the amount of negativity towards that is just like, there's constructive criticism, and then there's just you projecting your own insecurities of who you are into a comment. Like, that's really what it is.
Oh, you just dropped the mic. All right, Alex. Well, we're going like 2 hours.
Yeah.
Last question. Who do you recommend our listeners and watchers learn more about?
Okay, so I'm going to name, probably, it's funny, probably 3 film photographers, even though I don't shoot film. It's one of those things that when I finally do make money, hopefully, I want to get into, but it's a hobby that I'm kind of like, I will approach film photography as a hobby rather than, I'm sure it'll tie into my work. But I have a friend named Jacob LR. He's a film photographer. He is Jacob_LR on socials. I think he'd be great. There's also a YouTuber named Matt Marash. Have you ever heard of him?
I have, yeah.
He's large format. He would be interesting. I don't know a ton about him, but that name just popped into my head. Lucy Lumen is another film photographer from Australia. She does more fashion-based stuff, less landscapes, but she's great. And then, I don't know David's last name, but I know his Instagram handle is Imel, I-M-E-L, so David, I-M-E-L. He actually works for MKBHD, but does film photography as a hobby. And I've never talked to him in my life, but I think it'd be interesting just because he works so closely in the tech field. Like he's part of the biggest, if not the biggest tech channel on YouTube, but also just shoots film photography as his side thing. I think he'd be super interesting. Those are my recommendations in terms of people that you haven't had on, because I was going to tell you to have on Michelle Sons, and then I looked and you already had Michelle on here. And then I was going to tell you to have somebody else, and I gave up because I was like, oh, he's already had him too. And I was like, all right.
Sorry. Alex, this has been amazing.
Yeah, this
Thank
has been
you
great.
so
Thanks for
much.
having me on.
Of course. Yeah, this has been fun. And I will take you up on that offer to do a whole episode on like YouTube, because it fascinates me to no end.
Let's do it. I mean, I'm down if there's a time and people are actually interested to know the background of all the things that you would have no idea happens. Because when I learned it, I was just like, wait, this matters? Why does this matter? What? I don't understand. It's crazy. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much to Alex for the awesome conversation. I appreciate your honesty, vulnerability, and authenticity as it relates to your pursuit of photography, and how open you are regarding the challenges that we all face as creators. I am beyond thankful for the incredible generosity of our guests like Alex. I'm hopeful that listeners get value out of these conversations and that it transcends satiation of your boredom. My hope for the podcast is that it helps you become a better photographer, a better human, and that it gives you something to think about that hopefully leads to a spark in creativity or helps you solve a problem that you're facing. If you've gained any insight like this from listening to the show, I hope you'll consider supporting me on Patreon. To thank new supporters, between now and the end of July 2024, I will be offering a copy of the Natural Landscape Photography Awards Year 2 book to anyone who joins by supporting the podcast on Patreon at the $10 per month level or higher using the annual payment option. This, of course, accomplishes several goals for me, but hopefully you'll see it as a win-win. If you're already supporting the podcast at this level in the past year, hit me up and I'll happily send you a copy of the book as well. To join in, head to patreon.com/fstop and listen, or find a link in the show notes. Okay, that's all for now. Thanks for stopping in, collaborating with us, and listening. See you next week.